Hey guys, it's Jamie. In this video, we're going to look at sending automated emails with NameCheap and Firebase. Alright, first off, if you haven't seen my video on Angular Fire 2 authentication within the app, be sure to check that out. I'll leave an annotation right up there. Basically, at this point, you need to have an app which can log users in, because we're going to be using their login info in order to send them an email when they sign up. That'll be the example we're looking at today. Alright, so we're going to be picking up right where we left off in the other video. Basically, we have an app where it'll show us whether or not we're logged in, and if we're logged out, it'll show us that Firebase UI login, and that comes from right here. And so basically, at this point, we need to run Firebase init, because we need to use cloud functions to detect when the user signs up, and when they sign up, we just want to send them a welcome email. Thank them for signing up. Alright, so I'll run Firebase init just like that. And then here, we'll just check everything except for database, just in case. But the one you definitely need to check is functions, because that's what we're going to be using for the most part. And this is the auth project. And we can just use the defaults for all this stuff, except for I want to use TypeScript. And I hate tslint. Okay, install npm dependencies, sure. Alright, so if you notice, it created this functions folder right up here. Also, one thing is that the node modules inside of there is not part of the git ignore, and that's bad, because you don't ever want to track and get in node modules file. So I'm just going to go to wherever the existing node modules in the git ignore is, and then add functions /node modules, and then you'll see that it turns gray here, so it's not tracking those changes. Very important to do that so that your repository doesn't get too big. Oh, also down here, it wants to know what our public directory is. By default, that's just going to be dist for all basic Angular projects. And then, sure, we want to use that. Rules. Okay, great. So now we're all set up, and we can get into the real meat of this project, which is going to be inside of this index.ts, inside of our functions/source folder. Alright, so I've just pasted some code in here to make it go a little bit faster, because writing this from scratch would take a little bit. And don't worry guys, I'll leave like a GitHub link below so you can just copy this code, but I'm going to go through and explain it, okay? So basically at the top here, I always like to import things exactly like this. I find this works the best. So basically we need the ability to use functions, Firebase functions, and we need the admin module in order to grab the user info when they sign up. And then we basically just initialize the app, and then we grab references to the database for Firestore, as well as this user module so that we can access information about the user. Okay, and like I said, we're going to be using NameCheap, and their mail server is mail.privateemail.com. But for this part, you can just configure this with whatever mail server you're using. This example is all going to be NameCheap, because that's the domain name provider that I'm using. So I'll give you an overview of what you need to do if you want to set this up with your own domain name, because you want the emails coming from something like contact@mycompany.com, something like that. So basically, you grab your domain, search for whatever domain you want, buy it on NameCheap if you don't already have one, and then go to your account dashboard, go to your domain list, and find your domain and click Manage. Right now I already have this set up, but basically you'll just want to set up private email. They have a guide on how to do that, so just search for NameCheap private email setup. You'll find something. Basically, you need to have private email set up, or you need to have some sort of mail server so you can send emails in a reliable and secure way. And this is the only way I know how to do that. And it's not that expensive. It's probably costs you less than 20 bucks a year to have one of these servers. So make sure you set that up. It's well worth it. So when you were setting up your email account for that domain, you should have provided an email and password. And so whatever your email and password are, just take those values, and then we're actually going to set them up as configurations so that you don't have to put your email and password in the source code, which is of course not secure. So just make sure you have those on hand, and then you'll be able to go to the next step. Alright, so according to the Firebase docs, for this environment configuration, basically we're going to do something like this: Firebase functions config set, and then whatever the service name is, which is going to be NameCheap. It can be whatever you want, and then the key, and then whatever the key name is. So basically, you paste something like this. That's going to allow us to have these variables right here, the namecheap.email. So instead of some service, it's going to be NameCheap. Okay, and instead of key, it's going to be email. And then you set up your email, contact@mycompany.com. So you set that up. After that, you can do another one for NameCheap. You know, put password there, and then make the next string the password. So just do the same thing twice, like that. Press enter. And so once you've run that command, the next time you deploy the functions, which we'll do in a second, by the way, Firebase will know about your email and password, which is very important to have those, because that's how it's going to send the emails. It's going to send emails on behalf of you from that email which you've configured. Okay, and then down here for this next part, this is like the new user setup. So basically we make a function called new user setup, and then that just says when there's a user created, we're going to go ahead and do a couple things. So here I'm using promise.all to do two things at once simultaneously, and then returning the result of that will make sure they both complete before the function is terminated. So this first part is basically just going to write to the database a preferences object, which will contain any preferences you want. So this is just a great way to initialize the user preferences, because this is only called once on user create. And then finally we're going to send the user email. So I have a function called send email, which takes in three parameters: the email, the subject line, and then the body of the email as HTML code. And so this is a promise as well, and so we just do both those things and then return the result in promise.all. Alright, and then this little function right here is just a utility to return an empty promise. You'll see why we'll need that a little bit later. But here's like the core of this entire project is the send email. Okay, so like I said, it takes in a target email, a subject, and then the HTML. And so it basically sets up this mail options object, which is required by node mailer, which is what we're using. Again, we set that up at the top up here. Okay, so we basically just fill it with all the information we need. I have at the top the email, I just have an H1 that always says the header, which is going to be NameCheap and Firebase. That's just the header of the email I decided to give it. And once we have all that, we're going to call this other function I made called retry send email. And the reason I split this out into two, send email and send retry email, is because sending the email can fail for various reasons. It just sometimes it's very unreliable. Like sending emails is extremely unreliable, so it just retries. I told it to retry up to 5 times. And then after that, too bad, you don't get an email. It should be able to do it in 5 times. I'm very confident of that. And so basically this retry email method, it takes in those options, and then it takes in the number of retries. And if the retries left is less than 0, like it gets decremented every time. Like every time it fails, it tries to send the email again, but it minuses 1 from retries left. So basically, it gets a certain number of tries, and if it doesn't have any more tries, then it returns the empty promise. That's what that's for, because this function always needs to return a promise. Otherwise, the function won't know when to stop. And so it's very important that we return an empty promise in the case where there are no tries left. But other than that, we just grab that mail transport object we made earlier up here with all of our configuration, and we say, hey, mail transport object, we'd like to try and send mail with the mail options, and then please tell us if there's an error, and then any other information you have about what just happened. So basically it'll send the email and then tell us if there was an error, then we are going to retry, and if there's not, then it will print the message sent. Okay, and so we'll see that in the logs later. And then the last thing we got to do before we deploy is inside of the terminal, we're going to go into the functions directory, and you need to run npm I node mailer. So that's just a node module which we're going to use here. I don't think we're using any others, so let's use that. And then I'm going to go back to the root directory, and then I'm going to run Firebase deploy -- only functions. And assuming you don't have any errors, that should work. I should probably spell Firebase right. Alright, while it's doing that, I'm going to put a logout button on our page because currently we can only log in, we can't log out. And so when you're logged in, I'm just going to put a simple button, and on click, this button is going to call a function called like logout. It's going to be called log out. Okay, and that's only there if you're logged in. And then inside of the TypeScript, I'm going to make that function logout, and it's simply going to call afauth.auth.signout. Okay, so that calls sign out, and then looks like our functions are still deploying, so I'm just going to open up a new terminal by clicking the plus and then run ngserve so that we can see if our logout button actually works. Alright, so refreshing the page, we see our logout button right there. So I'm just going to click that. Now we're logged out. Alright, so let's just do test endwise.io. That's a company of mine, Endwise. That's also where the emails will be coming from, endwise.io. So let's see if our functions are finished deploying. Great, looks like they are. Oh, also one other thing I forgot to do is inside of Firebase, we need to set up the database because that's going to initialize our preference object. And if we don't have a database, then it's not going to work. And I'm going to be starting in test mode because like the permissions don't matter, this isn't a real app. Okay, now I'm going to go over to functions in a new tab and just head over to the logs section so that we can see what happens when we try and log in. So I'll make this account now, and then that should trigger a function back here. Ah, right, and this project actually needs to be upgraded because the external network is not accessible, and sending emails with NameCheap requires you to send emails with the NameCheap server, and so since that's external, you actually have to upgrade to either of these other plans. Alright, so I'm going to select the Blaze plan, and I've already set up a billing account. If you don't have one, you can just do that. But again, it's really, like, they give you a bunch of free credits, I think $300 of free credits, and it'll take you a long time to use those for like most small projects. If you're like a bigger company, make them pay for it. But it really should be quite minimal, but of course, it always depends on your needs. Anyways, so now this is a Blaze plan, and so I refreshed here, and so next time when we send emails, they should work. However, when it refreshed the database, I noticed this error. It has undefined as the user ID. So looks like I have a bug in the new code I wrote. So basically, it's not user ID here, it's UID. Yeah, so there's a property called UID in the user object. So we're going to want to use that instead. Oh, and also since we didn't ask for the username, we can't really put this here, but basically when you're configuring your stuff in the module file right here, if you had required display name to true, which I don't, then you could use display name here. So I'm just going to delete this, but just know that you can do something like that if you need to. So I definitely recommend doing that, but for this project, just going to keep it simple. Alright, so I'm going to deploy those new changes using Firebase deploy -- only functions once again. Alright, that's all finished, so I'm going to go back to the site and log out and make another email, and we'll save that, and then we'll go over to the functions once again, and I'm going to delete this document which is undefined. Oh, and by the way, just a note that it retried 5 times last time, just like we would expect. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's just because, like I said, the emails are unreliably sent. Just across the board, there's always errors, and so retry 5 times and should work. Looks like this time it worked on the first time. So it should have sent an email to the sign-up address, which was test2@endwise.io. And so right here in my email, we see an email from endwise.io, and it goes to test2@endwise.io. So that's again just my separate company email. Doesn't really have anything to do with JamieBot. It's just another, it's like where I host all my projects. And so yeah, it looks like it worked. It sent me an email with NameCheap and Firebase. And so the last thing we can do is just go into our database and make sure it made that preference object. So here it is. We have our preference object, and that's just for convenience. Doesn't really have anything to do with emails, except for maybe like the preferences newsletter, so I guess it kind of does. But I just wanted to show you that when you're doing stuff on the new user event, you just want to set up everything for them, set up their preferences, anything else you need to do, and then of course send the email, which was the focus of this video. So I hope you liked that. Leave a like if you did enjoy this video. Also subscribe if you're new here. I'd really appreciate that. Also, I love when you guys leave comments with like questions you have or like other video ideas you have. Like this was a user submitted idea. I'll just give a shout out to the user who suggested that. It's DMD Collection. So thanks to you for the video idea, and be sure to leave any more video ideas you guys have in the comments below. With that, I'll see you guys in the next video.